Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a very intriguing conversation with Elizabeth Clor. Now, Elizabeth, you're the CMO of Contegix, and you've actually had an interesting background. You started out in, comms, communication, and PR and writing, but you got very quickly fascinated on kind of the storytelling, branding, but then how that actually connects to the metrics in an organization and kind of looking at it through the lens of how do I grow this business, right? How do I increase revenues? How do I think more like a strategic business leader on top of all the fundamental things we need to do as a CMO and marketing? And so that's what we're talking about today, that how CMOs can play a dual role of a marketer and a business growth leader at the same time. But before we get right into that, I would love to have you expand a little bit more on your background.
Absolutely. So I started from a marketing communications background. I had a degree in English. My first few jobs were in PR and mostly doing writing for brochures, writing website copy. But as marketing technology evolved and you have technologies like Marketo, Eloqua, HubSpot, marketing automation, and then things like Google AdWords, then marketing itself becomes really transformed because as marketers, we have all of this data available to us to understand how those stories that we're telling, how the messages that we're putting out, how those resonate with customers, resonate with prospects. Tools like marketing automation allow us to play an active role in delivering leads to sales and then really understanding what the sales funnel look like. So as opposed to just being the person who was writing the website content, coming up with the messaging, I sort of transformed as a marketer into someone who was looking at the holistic growth of the company and the role that marketing plays, not just from one angle, but from multiple different angles and channels.
Well, I think that's a good segue into, because you've got a very defined kind of dual roles of a CMO. And I'd love to hear you just kind of your definition of what those dual roles are and why. That would be great.
Yeah. So dual roles would be the head of the marketing function, leading a team of marketers, running campaigns, looking at the marketing metrics, the day-to-day sort of marketing function, if you will. And then the other role as CMO is really business leader and sitting on that executive team, helping steer the direction of the company strategically, primarily from a go-to-market perspective and kind of making those decisions, being part of those conversations that will really impact the growth of the company. And then those roles are obviously very, very connected because once you are aligned with the objectives of the business, being able to really execute on those with the team, being able to communicate to the team as a leader how what they are doing is impacting the growth and the progress of the business.
So here's what's interesting is that I think we're all nodding our heads, right, on those dual roles. If you talk to CEOs or CROs, right, they're typically lots of times very short-term focused, right? As a CRO, you've got quotas, right? You're going to the board meeting and like, how are we doing this quarter? How's next quarter shaping up, right? And the CEO wants to know the same questions. So if you would ask like a CRO or a CEO, what do you want the role of the CMO to be? They're not necessarily going to answer this dual role, right? They're going to stay more focused on kind of the functional marketing, role here. Yet you're a C-suite individual, right? You're on the executive leadership. You have a seat at the table, but earning that seat at the table, I think, is part of what you're talking about is this dual role, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts, because if you come in as just a marketer, you could have been a VP, right? Running marketing in an organization. There's a difference between that and a C-suite role and the responsibilities, right? And being in board meetings and where the board doesn't necessarily want to know about the functional things about the campaign that you have up and running right now. They want to know metrics. They want to know where we're headed, right? They want to know what the strategic plan is. So is what you're saying basically we need to help redefine even what the role of a marketer is to our C-suite counterparts. Is that a part of a challenge that you kind of see that we need to be growing into?
Absolutely. Marketing is execution is absolutely vital, but it is just one piece of the puzzle. And you can execute all day, but if it's not in line with the overall strategy of the business, then it's not going to be as effective. When I talk to CROs, the CEO, even board members, the conversation that I'm having with them is not around what webinars we did or where we advertised, but it's about the overall channel strategy. If we're talking about channels or tactics, why did we choose them? Why do we think our target audience is there? If we're talking about the positioning or the messaging, why how are we looking at the market? How are we looking at the market opportunity? And then from like a reporting and results perspective, not focused so much on like lead generations or website traffic or things like that, really focused on pipeline, and of that pipeline, what's the close rate? Also, really understanding that sales funnel and understanding how leads are converting. Because I think when you demonstrate that you really understand what's happening to those marketing leads, you can advocate for doing more of a certain program, or you could advocate for maybe shifting direction.
And what it sounds like is there's just a whole new set of competencies. There's a whole new, set of KPIs. There's a whole new way that you need to be thinking about your role. And what's your recommendation for maybe a CMO that is still maybe thinking, I am kind of more, operating more of my functional role versus a strategic business leader or a new CMO coming in? What's your recommendations in terms of like adopting this mentality, but kind of the steps that you need to start out on to get yourself oriented right?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about building those relationships inside of the C-suite. So, obviously, or probably the CMO is reporting to the CEO, and that's really important. But also alignment with the chief revenue officer on sales metrics, the chief information officer, the CIO on the marketing technology. And that comes down to a little bit more of an execution, but that is still a really, really important relationship. And actually, the CFO, my relationships with CFOs have been really important. And it's not just to be able to secure the budget, but it's to be able to plan and understand where the company is financially and how marketing can drive growth instead of just being looked at as a cost center.
Oh, that's a really important determination there, right? Because we are one of the biggest cost centers in
Yes.
the company, which is why the finger kind of points our way a lot of the time.
Yes.
Well, when you talk about kind of this business, strategic business role, and then part of that is defining revenue and growth targets.
Yes.
And how do you do that, right? That's different than defining, MQLs and SQLs and the typical metrics that in our functional role that we're looking at. How do you recommend we start getting focused more strategically on those growth metrics and measures?
Yeah, I mean, you could take a really broad view and you can look at the total addressable market and size that up and determine what percentage of that TAM the company can strive to have, and you can set your growth targets that way. Or you could use a model where we need to be having 20% year over year growth, 30%, working alongside the CEO and the CFO to come up with those types of numbers. You could work with the sales leader on that as well. I mean, obviously, those targets are going to be crucial to the sales leader's success, and look at sales team performance, maybe do kind of a bottoms up. How many sellers do we have? How many sellers do we need um, to get to those targets? So I think not just being given a number and so this is what you need to do, but working alongside sales and the CEO and looking at the market and trying to determine what is realistic for the market, for the company's maturity, for the amount of investment that we have that we're looking to put into our growth efforts.
And I love that. So like that's can be given a number, right? But really helping define and shape what is that realistic number, but a growth number, right? A number that stretches us. But also, it's become very popular these days that how does marketing help own some of those numbers? It's one thing to be given it, it's another thing to help set it, and it's another thing to start owning that. So as a CMO, how do you start owning those numbers? It's obvious from the sales side, right? How you own that. What's your perspective in terms of how you own the number from the marketing side?
Well, it's understanding what percentage of the revenue or of the growth should be coming from marketing. So you can look at how are the leads coming in? How's the business growing? What's the strategy? Is it growing through partners? Is it growing through marketing? And if so, is that digital marketing? Is that ABM? Is it coming from upsells, resells? Is it coming from just pure prospecting or outbound campaigns? And then looking at all of that and making a decision on what percentage of the revenue should come from marketing programs. And then of that percentage, then what is the corresponding number? And so now we have a target. And that's, this can be, I've seen at organizations where you could be like, oh, this was sales generated pipeline, or this was marketing generated pipeline, and the relationship can cause friction. I've found that there is very little friction, if not none, if it's still looked at as a shared goal and not a sales versus marketing thing. It's just, these are our targets. This is the goal. Here's the plan and the strategy on how to get there. And looked at as, not so black and white as so and so owns this and so owns that. But at the same time, you do need to have metrics and goals to motivate people and to march toward.
That makes good sense. The owning, that, and another aspect of that too is how do you own deeper and deeper into the funnel, right? So today's buyer's journey is like spaghetti, right? It's not linear at all. We all know that, right? So there are also things like owning part of the funnel means owning, things that typically a sales organization doesn't focus on, like building the brand, right? Thought leadership content, things like that. Um, but we know that those are things that are really important, right? Building the expertise of the brand, building the trusted advisor status. We're not sellers, we're more consultants, trusted advisors, all those words that we've heard over and over and over again. But how do you balance the kind of long-term and short-term in terms of, not only defining the goals, but obtaining and owning those goals? How do you talk with your CROs, your CEO, CFO about kind of those kinds of efforts that we need to be doing?
Yeah, that's something that I face every day. That's sort of the long term versus the short term. And not only in terms of branding versus pure lead gen or demand gen, but also in terms of going after markets and opportunities with very long sales cycles where you may not see the fruits of your labor for like 9 to 12 months. And so justifying how what you're doing today, we won't necessarily be able to measure it for a while. So how I manage that is say, look, this is not an either or. We can do both things at the same time. And also, a lot of the demand gen and the growth efforts are not going to be as effective if there's no great word of mouth or brand recognition, if they're not familiar to you in the marketplace. And then on the flip side, if you do have great brand recognition, if everybody knows who you are, if you're looked at as a leader, those leads will come a lot faster into the funnel. So, and yeah.
Well, there was a brilliant CMO that was on a while back in the podcast, and she said something that made it just crystallized it for me. I never really thought about it this way. And she said, today's brand is tomorrow's demand.
Hmm.
And if done right, it actually takes cycles away from the sales process, an ABM sales process, because if as an organization, we are positioned as experts in the industry, not just sellers of our product or service, right? That the sales role in motion doesn't have to prove that they are trusted advisors to the degree if the organization is doing that already, right? So I thought that made a lot of really great sense. I actually ran it by a number of CROs too, and everybody loves it. That, no CRO is going to say we don't want brand. They're just going to say don't sacrifice, what we're trying to do right now. Like make sure you're helping us build the pipeline right this second. And so it's a balance, like you're saying, and it doesn't have to be done, exclusively one or the other. So what I want to do is one of the things about being that strategic business leader is you get to think about foundational things, right? And so I wanted to run something by you that McKinsey and Gartner have been talking about, and it's about how do businesses today, B2B businesses, how do we establish long-term competitive advantage in the marketplace? And their basic notion is that in a day and age of rapid technological innovation and ChatGPT writing code and all that kind of stuff, that the day and age of product differentiation that is going to be a long-term sustainable growth strategy for the company is gone, right? That like innovation happens so quickly and competitors catch up and lead, and plus no competitor is ever going to go into you know a conversation with a company that they're selling to and say we only like check 6 of the 10 boxes that you really want with our product. Like everybody talks about, yeah, we got it covered, right? And if they don't, they're working on it really quickly, they're going to catch up. And we each have like 20, 30 different competitors on average. So we're not going to be the low price leader, and we don't really want to. So historically, like product and price as competitive advantage, they're saying is no longer. What they're saying is that the new long-term sustainable competitive advantage is CX, customer experience. And I would just love to know, do you believe that in today's business for B2B companies, that customer experience is the number one competitive advantage that we have today?
I absolutely think so. Oftentimes, when we think about customer experience in marketing, we tend to think of it more of a B2C thing. And I used to work at a company where our primary product was a customer experience management platform. And we did focus a lot on B2C. But I think a lot of times B2B marketers aren't necessarily thinking along those lines and aren't playing a role in driving that customer journey, understanding, doing things like customer journey mapping. A lot of times in B2B marketing organizations, you'll see a focus on brand or demand gen, and customer experience will often be left to the customer success managers, which is obviously a huge part of the customer journey and the customer experience. When you're talking about B2B, there's customer success managers. But as a marketer, there's also a huge role to play in defining that customer journey, understanding it. The first interaction that a customer will have with your business is with your brand. And we have to remember that even in B2B businesses, we're still selling to humans. So even though it's a group of humans, it's a buying team, we still have to appeal to their emotions and to their sensitivities and to their gut instinct. And so the branding and the messaging plays a huge role there. And then also understanding how that buyer is interacting with our marketing content on the website. Are they consuming, what pages are they looking at? What resources are they downloading? Are they coming to our events? How are those marketing campaigns and activities a part of the customer journey? And then also, what can we understand from customer feedback? So how are we collecting customer feedback? Are we using a voice of the customer survey or technology? And can we address that feedback in our marketing campaign? How can we as marketers have better messaging and more appropriate positioning that really resonates using that customer feedback? I did a research project a few years ago where we extensively interviewed our customers and then also some of our prospects about their customer journey with our company and why they chose us if they're a customer, or why they were considering us if they were a prospect. And we used that messaging. We used what we found in that research to drive the next iteration of our messaging so that it would really resonate with who our buyer was.
So we've just been talking about that customer experience is the number one competitive advantage, right? And we both agree with that. And what I'm now wondering is in the role of a C-suite executive, where you're now planning long term, you're planning for sustained growth. What new emphasis then does that bring to that planning process? The emphasis on customer experience as not only number one in defining competitive advantage, but then obviously the planning, the resources that have to go behind that. And how do you think about that as a C-suite executive now?
Yeah, and I think that's very collaborative too, especially with the head of customer success, and even with the chief revenue officer and the sales team, understanding what all of those touch points are, and do we need to invest more in people for those touch points? Do we need to invest in some sort of technology at any of those touch points? Where is there sort of friction in the sales process? Where is there friction once they become a customer, maybe in the onboarding process? Because when we understand that customer feedback, it's not just about paying lip service to it. It's not just about changing the branding. Obviously, as a marketer, that's where I'm focused on is the messaging and the positioning, but we also have to act on it as a company. So taking that customer experience, understanding that customer journey, and then making meaningful changes. It could be to the product itself. It could be to the customer support. It could be to the sales experience. Any of those pieces are critical to the customer journey. So I think that's how you sort of look at it long term, because usually the customer feedback isn't going to be a quick fix, especially if you're looking at it in aggregate.
It absolutely isn't a quick fix. There's no doubt about it. And I like the whole idea of the customer journey because that experience starts with the very first time they even like know who you are. Like it could be a LinkedIn post, right? It could be an email that they got. It could be an outreach from an SDR. It could be a number of different things. But that experience starts at the very beginning. And if the experience of working with you in the process of, completing the transaction and becoming a client of theirs, if that is easy, right, then that's also an indication of what it's going to be like to work with you afterwards as well. So here's one of the things that I wanted this goes into, and obviously playing the marketing role as well as the strategic business leader role. That the customer, the ICP, is the highest voice of authority in any business, right? So clearly defining the ICP and having agreement on that and deep understanding that ICP is really important. So here's my question is how do you think about defining the ICP and listening to them as you're making strategic decisions? And I'll give you a little bit of background here. It was shocking, but read a study recently that talked between marketing and sales. You know what percent had the same definition of the ICP? Only 16% on average. So I just want to know, how do you define the ICP? How do you get to know that ICP deeply and then therefore use them in that strategic planning process, right? As if they were sitting in the chair next to you, right? I just want to understand kind of how you think about that.
So there's a number of things to look at here. The first being, where are we having success today? Let's analyze our current customer base. What customers are the stickiest? Which customers are the most satisfied? Which customers are most likely to cross-sell, upsell? And then let's look at maybe customers where we've had some attrition. Maybe let's look at some deals that we've lost and do an analysis of what was that customer? What was their pain point? And then sort of a profile. What level were they? Were we talking to the right person? Maybe we needed to be higher up in the organization. Maybe we needed to be lower down. Are we in the right industries? So I think you can look at the target customer profile and look at what you have today and where you're having success. But then also in growing the business, do you really hone in and lean into where you're having success today and try to get more of those? Or if you want to grow and expand because you think that your product or service can be really relevant to maybe an adjacent industry, like if you're doing financial services, but you want to get into insurance, for example, a kind of adjacent industry there. you're doing one particular type of manufacturing and you want to get into a different. So looking at where you have success and then saying, okay, where can we do maybe one step to the side or a step up if we're trying to grow, or also looking at competitors and looking at their success, and trying to figure out who are they going after, how are they having success. So, so that's one sort of way I look at it, is looking at what you have now, and then diving deep into the why behind maybe the numbers. It's like, oh, we've got 50 of these and 30 of these and 20 of these. So you've got the quantitative, but you also need to understand the qualitative. And that's where talking to the customers come in. That's where voice of the customer and research comes in, and understanding what motivates those people. What is the biggest challenge that they are trying to solve, and how are we solving it? Um, and then are there potential other challenges? Maybe we're solving a challenge that we didn't even realize we were solving. So I've had that happen before, where you talk to a customer and they say, well, I was actually looking for this, but then when I started using your product, this really solved this other problem. And that's like a golden nugget right there. When a customer tells you that you're solving a problem that you didn't even realize that your product or service could. So that's where I think that talking to the customers, typically in B2B, you think of the sales team as the ones, talking to the customers every day. But I think marketing also has a huge role to play there too.
So I guess here's an open-ended question. What haven't we talked about yet in terms of this dual role, right? Being a strategic leader in the organization as well as the functional role. What else haven't we talked about that you think is important that we should know?
Well, I think it's important to tie all of these things together. And I think that's what an effective chief marketing officer does. And it's kind of going back to the beginning, is not just about the tactics, and it's not just about the messaging or the customer insights or the ICP. It's about all of it together, the growth, the working cross-functionally with the CFO, the CIO, and the CRO, and having a shared vision of success, a shared vision of growth, and then really executing on it through the multiple channels. But I think always operating under the lens of, is this really moving the needle? Is this really bringing us in the direction that we want to go? Or are we just doing this because we're in marketing, we always send out 5 emails a week or whatever it is. Are we doing things just because they're in our comfort zone? And how can we stretch ourselves as marketers to think beyond maybe the traditional channels or the traditional approaches, and look at marketing from what specifically does this business need, even though we all have experiences from other companies. Let's really focus on this customer, this product, this service, and do what we can, to really tweak and tailor our approach to that.
So I'm going to ask you a very personal question.
Sure.
What are you most proud of, right? We're talking about all the things that we need to be doing, right? And in these dual roles that you've played, what are you most proud of that you've been able to accomplish?
I've actually been thinking a lot about this lately, in my career. And honestly, what it comes down to is leading and building and leading a strong team, mentoring people. To me, accomplishment is all about the relationships and how you connect with people. That's what's most satisfying to me. It is obviously very satisfying to see the numbers go up. And I've had experience, growing several different businesses very quickly. And those are all huge accomplishments. And I could talk about all the numbers and the growth rates and the MQLs and SQ. I could talk about that all day long. But at the end of the day, what I find most personally fulfilling is, as a leader, how I'm leading the team, and how the employee experience as they're going through and as they're executing and as they're day to day. What kind of leader am I being? And just helping team members form relationships, helping them grow their career, and mentoring them as well.
So this leads to my very last question, because we've covered a lot of territory here. But if there was one thing that you wanted to leave the audience with today, what would that be?
I think the most important thing is to take a step back from the day to day and think on a strategic level. And I know I've said that multiple times in this podcast, but I think it's just so true because marketing is usually very, very busy with a lot of different tactics and a lot of different campaigns. And marketing can become very overwhelming at all levels, at the CMO level, all the way down to like your graphic designer, your copywriter. So I think it's not only important for the CMO to be thinking strategically, but to also pull the entire marketing team in to understand that strategy so that everyone on that team understands how what they are doing is driving toward that vision and that goal.
I love that. I love it. I love your focus on the team for what you're most proud of and your takeaway there. There are going to be people that have questions that would it be appropriate if we gave out a LinkedIn to your LinkedIn profile so that people could reach out to you and ask questions?
Absolutely. I'm happy to answer anything.
Well, great. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today and really reminding us. My biggest takeaway, truthfully, is we have these dual roles. And in an environment where we get busy, we tend to rely back on what we've done most in our career and our functional self, which is extraordinarily, extraordinarily important. But if we only do that, then we're not earning that seat at the table, right? And we're not taking on the leadership roles that we've been given. So uh, I love the focus on this and your insights from this, and just thank you for coming on to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.